welcome to the Brothers Talk on Millennium's M24 News with your hosts, Rod and Scott, where our purpose is a simple one. We are unfiltered African-American men with no strings attached, giving voice as the most feared, most misunderstood, and most rarely heard from segment of the population on topics of interest to us for education and enlightenment and entertainment. To reach us with your comments and questions, suggestions, we're at the Brothers Talk on Twitter, the Brothers Talk on Instagram, the Facebook group of the same name. And if you care to share in more detail, hit us up at the email address, thebrotherstalk@gmail.com. And also tune into our weekly podcast, which drops each Friday wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. And in our news segment this week, we pose the question, what do 45 and Charles Manson have in common? And the simple answer is not enough. If you remembered the late Charles Manson, who was widely cited as one of the most evil people in the history of this nation, well, Charles Manson was convicted of the murders of Sharon Tate and the LaBianca family, as well as others in that time. But Charles Manson never physically shot or stabbed or did anything to any of those people. But he was then jailed for the rest of his life, including having had a death sentence commuted because he was the mastermind behind that instance. So we asked the question, what is the difference when you have plenty of audio and videotape as well as lots of witnesses who say that 45 was indeed the reason behind the January 6th treason that was geared to overthrow the government? So this is something that simple mind should be able to really process, because it doesn't take much to look at the fact that Charles Manson masterminded those murders and was jailed accordingly with a lot less evidence than you have against 45 and what happened on January 6th.
The thing about what with 45 and what happened on January 6th, he had been encouraging and motivating and pushing that group of people to this point months in advance. Even the day before and the day of, he kept talking to these people about how they got to be strong and how they got to be aggressive and not letting people steal democracy from them. When in fact, that's what he was doing. The thing that's confusing to me about 45 and how in plain sight you got him on, like Rod said, you have him on tape. You got him on video. You got him on all the media out here. Twitter. He's saying it in Twitter. He's on YouTube. He is constantly encouraging these people to use violence, but yet he's not being held accountable. My theory is that he has something on the majority of the Republicans because they won't cross him no matter what.
I couldn't agree with you more, Scott. And you made a great point about the fact that the FBI and other law enforcement agencies saw this coming from a mile away, because it did start way even before the election when they started asking 45 questions about what he would do if he lost. And he was making noises even then about what happened on January 6th. And so it continued right up until that day. And of course, as we just said, on that day, you have him being filmed. You have him being recorded audibly. You have those people who actually committed the acts actually now as a part of their defense, saying that they were told by the president to go to the Capitol and take up arms to make sure that they weren't going to be cheated out of the election. So you have that kind of situation that took place, and it just bears no kind of defense that you cannot put it on them. And I also think what you said is correct, is that one of the reasons I'm pretty sure that they do not want to actually look into it is because they are well aware that there is video of congressmen actually and their staffers giving tours. So I like when they start saying, well, it was a tour. Well, yeah, it was a tour when they were giving them the layout of the Capitol when they weren't even supposed to be in the building. But yet we got Democrats running away from that when they should run to it. They say, yeah, it was a tour, but it was a tour by Republican congressmen and their staffers. Therefore, they're afraid of their complicity being exposed.
You know, you're right. And I don't know what's the strategy. even if there's a strategy for the Democrats in holding these people accountable. I know some of these Republicans are your colleagues, and I don't know whether you think that one day you may be in that same position. We know that, and the FBI knows that some of these Republican congressmen played a big role in orchestrating this, in provoking this. I mean, their hands are all over this. But the fact that the Democrats won't just come out and say, hey, we just want to hold people accountable. We're going to hold people accountable. I don't even hear them saying that. You hear a few of them saying that we're trying to hold accountability, but they're not hold people accountable, but they're not saying it in a forceful way, in a way that you really feel like something is going to come out of it, that they really mean it. It's like they're just going through the motion. But for the most part, they're not. And when you think about the Republicans, I mean, they're just totally, it's like immune to the truth. It's like, we're not going to even vote on having this commission to find out what happened. They tried to overthrow the government. We can call it insurrection. We can call it whatever they want to call it. But what it was treason. They tried to overthrow the government. And for some reason, he's not being held accountable for his role in it.
And then, of course, we also would ask the question why the Black Caucus isn't out there making the noises that say that if any of that group would have been Black people, that we know that there would have been a bloodshed there like no other time in history. So stay tuned. We'll be right back with more of the Brothers Talk on M24 News. Stick with us for the next segment.
Millennium TV, bridging communities worldwide. We broadcast diverse international content from Europe, Asia, Africa, and now right here in the USA. Watch us via Roku on your smart TV. Submit your own content to 1530entertainmentllc@gmail.com. Download the Millennium TV app from the App Store to stream our shows anywhere, anytime. Millennium TV.
And we're back on the Brothers Talk Show on M24 News. In our political segment this week, we have to acknowledge that the entire government has decided to make Juneteenth a national holiday. And while this is nice window dressing, it certainly goes and falls far short of the so-called bipartisanship needed to protect Black voting rights, as in H.R. 1. And at the same time, it falls far short of even making Election Day a national holiday so that more people would actually be able to participate in the process. And so it just goes to show you once again how they believe that simple symbolism is enough to try and pacify what people have bled and died for. We appreciate the fact that they want to make Juneteenth known, but at the same time, they don't want Juneteenth to be taught in the schools. So how will they actually get around that notion that on the one hand, they want to steer clear of anything that talks about enslavement and racism, and at the same time want to celebrate a holiday that is really saying that's the day that Black people actually were able to get out of legalized enslavement. So you have this dichotomy that continues to go on. Whereas H.R. 1, which is certainly more substantive because it talks about the right to vote, it talks about the opportunities that should be given to people to participate in the political process, and you can't find even one Republican basically ready to sign on to that. But Juneteenth was unanimous.
Rod, hey, I tell you, man, you hit so many nails on the head. There's a lot to unpack in what you just said. And especially regarding Juneteenth and the fact that there are governors in states who are in their conservatives, Congress people in states who are passing laws so that anything pertaining to diversity and inclusion, anything mentioning slavery and the role that white America played in slavery and the way that they treated and brutalized Black people, anything mentioning in that, we gonna pass laws so that we can't even talk about it. But yet, guess what? we're going to give you a holiday, and it's going to be Juneteenth, a day where, and it was atrocious in Juneteenth, that I think it was 2.5 years after slaves were free. We're going to tell y'all 2.5. That in itself. So how can you get around even when people start talking about, well, what is Juneteenth all about? How can you avoid talking about slavery and the role that is played in this country and the making in this country? The other thing that you said that was, to me, that was really significant and interesting is the fact that nobody is talking about making voting a national holiday. So if you say, okay, we got a national holiday to vote, that will circumvent a lot of these laws and policies that Republicans are putting in place, because now people can go, they don't have to worry about taking off work and vote. But you don't hear the Democrats and people who are supposed to be about voting rights and for voting rights, you don't hear them putting that out there, that carried out there. Why? Because majority of American people will agree with that. They will say, yeah, you know what? We want that. But I hadn't heard anybody say anything about
it. And you asked a good question about the Juneteenth holiday, when we know fully well the model for how they will actually observe it and how they will actually teach it is already in place with the Martin Luther King Jr. holiday, because you have had Martin Luther King Jr. so whitewashed today that you have Republicans who will literally run as draping themselves in Martin Luther King's so-called legacy as they perceive it. Now, those of us who know and read and were a part of understanding what King's real legacy was that King was a virulent anti-capitalist from the standpoint of saying that if capitalism was only about making rich people richer while poor people got poor, then he was against that. He was not a socialist, but he was anti the idea that you could have so much wealth at the same time and have so much poverty. And so what happens each January on Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday observance, which is a national holiday, you have people who just basically don't know anything more about him than the name and that he was a Black man. And so they'll do the same thing with Juneteenth. Juneteenth will be a holiday that years from now, nobody will really know anything really about it, because they really won't dive into the fact that you just mentioned, which was that it was the last of the African Americans who were enslaved to be informed that they're actually celebrating to denote the official end of enslavement. So there won't be really much other than that, and which is why it's such a hollow kind of observance, because it doesn't do Juneteenth, while it didn't mean an awful lot to a whole lot of Black people before. And it certainly isn't going to be something that they're going to waste any time in the white classrooms and in the white society actually teaching to any degree of specificity.
I think you're exactly right. And this just seems like a real small band-aid to try to pacify Black people who are saying, we need some reparations. That's what the people in Tulsa were talking about when they were talking about Wall Street, Black Wall Street. We need reparations, and we need fair reparations. And it seems to me that this is just really a band-aid. Let's just pacify people. Let's slow them down for a minute. They got Juneteenth, and they'll go away. They'll be happy with this for a while. That's what it really feels like to me, because it just seems like it came out of nowhere. It was not like there was even any debate about it. It was just like, hey, they signed this bill, and Juneteenth's a holiday.
And stay with us. We'll be right back with more of the Brothers Talk on M24 News.
Millennium TV, bridging communities worldwide. We broadcast diverse international content from Europe, Asia, Africa, and now right here in the USA. Watch us via Roku on your smart TV. Submit your own content to 1530entertainmentllc@gmail.com. Download the Millennium TV app from the App Store to stream our shows anywhere, anytime. Millennium TV.
And we're back on the Brothers Talk Show on M24 News. In our sports segment this week, we have to talk about Becky. and Becky in the NBA by the name of Becky Hammon. And nothing is more disheartening to me in the world of sports than the notion that Becky Hammon is now interviewing for one of the 5+ and probably will be even more NBA jobs that are available. Why? Because there are so many qualified African American players and assistant coaches who are much better qualified and warrant the consideration, more than consideration, really should have had jobs, because we have lamented long about the fact that you've had the Mike D'Antonis and the Steve and Jeff Van Gumps and the others who've been recirculated white coaches who never won anything but get job after job, while black coaches are pretty much a one and done. So add to this mix now that we're going to have Becky Hammon. And just a little bit about Becky Hammon. Becky Hammon did play college basketball, but this is the same Becky Hammon who did not make the United States Olympic team when she tried out. And so what was her response? She went and played for the Russian national team. And so after not even playing well for them and coming back to the United States, Greg Popovich decided to make her one of his assistants on the San Antonio Spurs. So, and she's already even had an opportunity to be a bench coach there because Tim Duncan stepped down as his lead assistant. And so Becky Hammon had a chance to coach when Popovich was out for whatever reason was. She was the bench coach there. But the idea that this person, who in some instances could even be called a traitor in the sense that she went against her own national team because she wasn't good enough to make the American national Olympic team, but now that she might leapfrog past brothers like Jason Kidd and Avery Johnson and Sam Cassell and Patrick Ewing and Penny Hardaway and Juwan Howard and many others to get a job as a head coach in the NBA, it just doesn't wash, and it really doesn't make any sense, because you wonder what it is she could add to any players in the NBA.
You know, again, Rod, you said a mouthful. And I just want to be clear. I want people to understand here. We want to be clear. We're not being sexist at all. We're not being racist at all. What we're saying here is, how is it that all of the guys that Rod just named, who paid their dues, these guys have gone through the process. Some of them coached in college, like Juwan Howard and Patrick Ewing. You got Patrick Ewing that was also has been an assistant coach on with the Knicks and the Miami Heat. You got a number of these guys who played at a high level in college, in the pros. They're assistant coaches now. And I do believe of the 5 vacancies that's open, Becky Hammon is going to get one of those positions. My question is, how do you justify that? What do you tell these guys? What is it that's going to make her more qualified than they are? What is the one thing? What, she sat on Popovich's bench? Popovich hadn't won anything since Kawhi Leonard left. So what is it? How can you sell that to people? And look like, to me, if they do that, they're making a big mistake, because now you're watering down the NBA. And there are going to be a lot of disgruntled people. I think you're going to have a lot of disgruntled players, because it looks like I'm being passed up. I'm being passed over for somebody who is much, much less qualified, more less qualified than I am. But she's a white female.
And I couldn't agree with you more, from the standpoint that I'm also asking the question, where are the Black players who should be stepping up? Because I know very soon the handkerchief heads, who are the announcers and those, and I'll start to call them out as I see them, because I'm sure I expect to hear Jalen Rose and Charles Barkley and Shaquille O'Neal start to say, "Oh, she'll make an excellent coach. She should be in there." And they know they're lying through their teeth. I mean, they're just being company spokesmen. They're just handling the company line, because they know they wouldn't have wanted to play under her as a coach. I will be somewhat sexist in this, in that I just don't see what she adds to this process. This is a game that is not just about your mental acuity. This is about your ability to physically understand. It is why you have a lot of white coaches that really don't also succeed, because they can't actually empathize and sympathize, or certainly identify with what is actually going on the court. It's not about just drawing up X's and O's. So if you can't actually know what's actually happening out there, unfortunately, we live in this really racist society where they believe that, there's this white brain power that is able to move these black pawns around on the football field or the basketball court, and that is as much as it takes. And that is just really problematic to me.
I think you really, really nailed it, Rod, when you talked about what value is she adding. Because in the heat of the battle, and you got guys who have played in the league, like the Atlanta head coach right now. This guy played in the league for years. And look what he's done to a team that was last, and now they're on the verge of playing for the Eastern Championship. What can she bring to the table in terms of playing experience? She hadn't been in any of those positions that these players have been in. She hasn't been out there. She doesn't know what it's like physically. She doesn't know what it's like mentally. So how can she possibly teach them anything, help them with any situation?
You couldn't have asked a better question. Please stay tuned. We'll be right back with more of the Brothers Talk Show on M24 News.
Millennium TV, bridging communities worldwide. We broadcast diverse international content from Europe, Asia, Africa, and now right here in the USA. Watch us via Roku on your smart TV. Submit your own content to 1530entertainmentllc@gmail.com. Download the Millennium TV app from the App Store to stream our shows anywhere, anytime. Millennium TV.
We're back on the Brothers Talk Show on M24 News. In our culture and entertainment segment this week, we want to talk about one Bill Maher and his being, in effect, the kind of white liberal that Martin Luther King Jr. warned us about. Just recently, he had a dust up with Kevin Hart because Bill Maher represents that type of white liberal that is often believes, or that they actually believe that they have a right to do and say things around Black people because they want to claim they're woke. And that is the individual that King did warn about, because he said, these are the people who really will be your biggest enemy. He said in no uncertain terms that that's the one who is always willing to tell you that things are better and that we really should slow down with the things that you're asking for. And so they really kind of infiltrate the mix. And so in this little dust up, so Bill Maher was basically taking issue with something that Kevin Hart said, where he said that, things are worse and more racist now than they've ever been. And so Maher came back at Kevin Hart saying that if you think things are worse now, then you should adjust your mask because it's covering your eyes. And so what Kevin Hart was really saying was that there are things that are certainly worse now than they ever have been. And so we don't need anybody to officially believe that we're taking things so literally as to say that it's exactly as bad as it was under slavery, but we are certainly with Kevin Hart when he says things like there are things that have shown no improvement and that in some instances are getting worse. And so to have one of these white liberals like Bill Maher, who has his weekly show, which a lot of Black people subscribe to and a lot of Black people watch, to effectively make himself the arbiter of explaining to Black people what we should feel offended by or what we should take offense of, then we don't really need that kind of anything more than another guy who believes that he is superior to us and can tell us what to do.
It is disappointing because I used to look forward to watching Bill Maher's show a few years ago because Bill Maher seemed to be woke when a lot of liberals weren't. He seemed to be ahead of the curve, and he was saying things that I agreed with. But here recently, these last 3 or 4 years, Bill Maher seem to have, to me, have gotten so comfortable with the fact that Black folks had accepted him and trusted him. That's what really it seems like. I think he dated a couple of Black women, that kind of thing. But he's gotten so comfortable to the point that it seems like it's parental. Like he's like you said, Rod, that white supremacy is coming out as if I know better. I'm smarter than y'all. And I got permission. You've given me permission to say all this nonsense to y'all. And I just stopped watching this show because instead of him being woke, look like what he's doing now is he's attacking anything that Black people are fighting for. It lately looked like that's what I've seen. And I've noticed that some of the usual Black folks that he had on his show, I haven't been seeing them on his show the last couple of years because I think they're stepping away from him because he is that dangerous liberal who feels like, hey, wait a minute, slow down. You've gotten enough for right now. Just wait and take baby steps. Look like that's what he said.
And he used the right term, patronizing, because he is that individual who thinks that, okay, like we had a segment a couple of weeks ago talking about the I've got a Black friend defense. Well, his is I date Black women. Mm-hmm. And therefore that gives me right to use my whiteness to tell Black people what to do. If you want to go and do your white splaining over to other whites, that's one thing. But as you said, he is deigned to put himself in a position that he believes he can tell Black people. Like he said in one occurrence that in essence, if the person who had an offensive term said to them isn't offended by it, then you shouldn't be offended by it. So, it's that kind of just ludicrous behavioral statement that says that in essence, so if we're out there and we hear somebody use the N-word or in our presence, but it wasn't specifically said to us, then it shouldn't bother us. That's his argument. And that's the kind of thing that in essence, he puts himself up as the arbiter of what anybody should be offended by when he is a person who is on a whole nother side and cannot, except for the fact that he has dated Black women, have any real bona fides.
Yeah, I mean, you're right, Rod. He feels like he's not just the arbiter of what people should be offended by. He wants to be the arbiter of what Black people should be offended by. I'm the one who determined for you what you should be offended by, and that's the thing that's so condescending and about his whole behavior towards Kevin Hart, and not just Kevin Hart, but the Black people in general here lately. He's just been, to me, extremely condescending, as if like, we're kids and we can't think for ourselves. And he knows better. But it's just his whole behavior. And then some of the guests that he's been having. I saw where he gave a platform. On one hand, you want to be a woke liberal, but on the other hand, you're giving people like Lion, Kellyanne Conway a platform to come on your show. Nobody wants to hear any more live and hear that stuff that Kellyanne Conway had been saying. So like he was having not Laura Ingram, but the other right-wing woman, he used to have her on there all the time, write all these damn hateful books. Why are you giving those people platforms when you're supposed to be this woke liberal? He's not looking like a woke liberal to me.
Exactly. So it's one of those situations that we really have to raise the flag and not allow them to use the I have a Black friend or I date Black women defense. Stay tuned. We'll be right back with more of the Brothers Talk Show on M24 News.
Millennium TV, bridging communities worldwide. We broadcast diverse international content from Europe, Asia, Africa, and now right here in the USA. Watch us via Roku on your smart TV. Submit your own content to 1530entertainmentllc@gmail.com. Download the Millennium TV app from the App Store to stream our shows anywhere, anytime. Millennium TV.
And we're back on the Brothers Talk Show on M24 News. In our education segment this week, we have to beat the drum again about the opposition to critical race theory. And critical race theory, once again, for those of you who may be new to the broadcast is or not as knowledgeable about it, is effectively the efforts to acknowledge the impact that racism and enslavement had on the founding and establishment of this nation right up through the present day. And so it is not really a theory because it only is a theory in that it hasn't been put into the information chain that currently exists in the form of textbooks. So it is basically considered theorized because they haven't measured the impact. But the truth of the matter is that it has continued to influence and continued right through the current day, which is obvious on all of the disparities that exist across the paradigm of education, healthcare, wealth, employment, etc. And so yet we are seeing state after state, which are pushing back against the notion of critical race theory, even though it is currently not being taught in any state schools, but they're effectively banning it before it can be introduced. As Mark Lamont Hill recently mentioned, it's only something that's taught at the graduate level in legal and financial circles as a way to acknowledge that there have been these mass inequities that have occurred due to the impact of racism. And so you have the perfect example of white supremacy and the fact that they are now able to deny that white supremacy could even be taught as a subject matter in schools.
You know, Rod, when it comes to critical race theory, it seems to me that what these guys do, what the conservatives do, is they look for something that is a wedge issue that they know the people who vote them in office really don't understand. These people really don't understand, even when you just define what it was, they don't get it and they're not hearing it. They think it's something that's already in practice. When you look at, there have been so many articles, so many news clips, every day there's somebody holding up a sign about critical race theory, not teaching, not to my kid, you know, you're indoctrinating my kid. They're using that, they found another wedge issue because the other wedge issues were wearing thin. So now they have one that they're not, they're actually misrepresenting it, and they know they're misrepresenting it. The question to me is that I would like to ask, if I had an opportunity to talk to one of them, what is it that you fear? Even if you taught critical race theory, what is it about the critical race theory that you fear? That is it that it's gonna tell the truth? Is it gonna paint white America in a way that they treated Black people during slavery, post-slavery, Jim Crow, in the present day? Is it because it's going to expose you as being who you are? What is it? What's all the resistance to even teaching, not just teaching, but even talking about critical race theory?
Well, one of the things you're absolutely on point about is the fear that they have. But I think it's also based in the fact that they are continuously on alert because of the calendar. W. Kamau Bell on his show on CNN, United Shades of America, recently talked about the browning of America, if you will, in that 2045 is the date that most of the census projections say that whites will no longer be the majority in this country. And so in essence, that means in less than 25 years. So they see a countdown, and a lot of them who are now embracing this notion of pushing back against critical race theory are really afraid that on that day, almost at on the stroke of midnight on January 1st, 2045, that suddenly there's going to be this great conflagration and revolution that's going to turn back the hands of time and make sure there's a new enslavement, but this time with different subjects. And so I think there's an awful lot of that innate fear, which it just doesn't make sense. It's irrational, but it's only rational from the standpoint that you realize that you've got something to hide, something that you've been doing wrong to people for as long as you've been alive, and that has been a part of your history. And so now you fear that the pendulum is going to swing the other way. So it's very easy to bait them into this false narrative argument that we shouldn't have critical race theory taught.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're exactly right on all those points. Is that it seems as though that these people are they fear losing the majority so bad that we got to stop this at all costs, and not even thinking, not even doing any critical thinking or below the surface. It's not like overnight people are going to take power if it ever happens, because the institutionalized racism and the structure that they built for themselves got to be taken down brick by brick. And that's it took centuries to put it up. It's going to take centuries, I think, to take it down. But they're so fearful because the people at the top, the rich folks, that's their new weapon. That's their way to keep us separated. We got to find something to distract these folks from what's really going on. And now with critical race theory, the boogeyman is coming to get you. And that's what they got them thinking, that, like you said, in 25 years, oh, you're going to be in the minority, and overnight things are going to change, like switching on the light switch, flipping on the light switch. That seemed to be the narrative that they've been taught, or they've been told.
You couldn't have said it any better. Stay with us as we'll be right back with more of the Brothers Talk Show on M24 News.
Millennium TV, bridging communities worldwide. We broadcast diverse international content from Europe, Asia, Africa, and now right here in the USA. Watch us via Roku on your smart TV. Submit your own content to 1530entertainmentllc@gmail.com. Download the Millennium TV app from the App Store to stream our shows anywhere, anytime. Millennium TV.
And we're back on the Brothers Talk Show on M24 News. In our relationship segment this week, we want to talk about the relationship that we have amongst ourselves. And in particularly, I want to bring up the name Mohamed Fofana. Who is Mohamed Fofana, you ask? He is in the public relations department of the San Jose Sharks, which is a hockey team. You know that we're not really big into hockey as a people. There's less than 1% Black in hockey, period. And yet the San Jose Sharks, as a part of their support of Juneteenth, put out a very alarming tweet, which they thought was going to, I guess, be in support, but it was of two black fists upraised with chains and a shark's teeth actually biting through the chains. Well, of course, those of us who know anything about the Middle Passage realize that that is a very disturbing image because of all the black bodies that were consumed by sharks along the way between North Africa and this continent, so much so that they talk about there's being a permanent line of sharks who continue to patrol that area because of the thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of bodies that were tossed overboard. So enter Mohamed Fofana when there was a big backlash to that imagery. And Mohamed Fofana, who was then said to be the artist as a part of their public relations department, who was made the sacrificial lamb, in that they acknowledged that he was the person who was behind that imagery. And so even if he made a mistake, instead of him coming out and acknowledging that it was a problem, he effectively sort of doubled down and saying that he was actually trying to show how the San Jose Sharks were willing to stand up for civil rights and for Black people as a part of their wokeness. And so I guess the issue that we want to bring up is that there are constantly too many of these examples where when a situation arises that becomes somewhat uncomfortable for white corporations and white people who have made grievous errors of judgment in what they present to us, they find the Black face that is always willing to come out and basically bite the bullet. And so we need to do better. We need to be better than that when these kind of situations arise and not allow ourselves to be tools of the white establishment.
You know, Rod, you're so right. And there are countless examples of that situation happening time and time again. And to me, it happens all the time in media. This guy was, innocent guy who went out there probably to try to save his job or try to show the white establishment or the people he worked with that he's not going to cower down to black folks. So I'm going to go out here and disrespect black folks, even though, he was ignorant, about what he was doing. But then you can turn on TV, on TNN at any given night and watch a basketball game, and there's Charles Barkley and Shaquille O'Neal validating. They know that a decision that has been made, like giving Steve Nash back-to-back MVP awards when he shouldn't have gotten one. So they'll turn to somebody like a Charles Barkley, and he will validate it. They talk about how and explain why Steve Nash should have won. So it's okay. It'll go over easy with the rest of the black population or the blacks in playing in the NBA. So you have guys like that does that on a constant basis, and they don't represent how black people feel or how we think. But yet they're readily available. Another situation, we talked about about this prior to this segment, and that's when sometimes there may be a catastrophic accident or something happen in a community, and it may happen in a black community or a mixed community, and lo and behold, the one person that we don't want them to interview is going to be the crackhead chicken head standing over here with no teeth, one teeth, and hair sticking up like she stuck a finger in an electric socket, and with a third grade education. And of all the people for them to interview, this is one they pull out to represent the black voice. It happens all the time.
And so going back to your sports analogy, I mean, it's way too prevalent there. And it's obvious that too many of these individuals have basically decided that they will bow at the altar of whiteness to maintain whatever kind of position. You've seen everything from the Stephen A. Smiths, who basically find any way to just exhibit the most ridiculous kind of buffoonery that there is, to the other end of the spectrum, where, as you said, you have the nightly Emmy winning show NBA because of the buffoonery that goes on between Shaq and Barkley. I sometimes feel bad for Kenny Smith, who sits there and tries to be the voice of reason, but he understands that in essence that they are a part of this process, and so he represents some form of sanity there. But I think if you watch it long enough, which I don't, I confess that I can never stomach more than a few minutes of it, that I see that he could probably get sucked up into it as well.
I mean, really, when you think about it, they're entertainers, but really they need to be truthful to themselves and to their audience. But when a guy like Stephen A. Smith or Michael Wilbon, his is not so much this buffoonery as it is him just being disingenuous sometimes. Because he's a respected journalist, he's a respected sport writer. This guy is respected, and then on some occasions, he'll come out and support the establishment.
You couldn't have said it better again. Stay with us. We'll be right back with more of the Brothers Talk Show on M24 News.
Millennium TV, bridging communities worldwide. We broadcast diverse international content from Europe, Asia, Africa, and now right here in the USA. Watch us via Roku on your smart TV. Submit your own content to 1530entertainmentllc@gmail.com. Download the Millennium TV app from the App Store to stream our shows anywhere, anytime. Millennium TV.
And we're back on the Brothers Talk Show on M24 News. In our Black on Black Love segment, Scott, you have a particularly interesting first.
Yeah, I'm a little bit torn about this first because it's a great accomplishment for this brother. His name is Dr. Jason Wingard. And Dr. Wingard is the first Black president, has been announced and appointed to be the first Black president in the 137-year history of Temple University. The reason I'm a little torn about that is the fact that I think it's a good accomplishment. It's a nice accomplishment for him. You know, Black folks are making progress, becoming presidents of prestigious university, but they also stated that the reason that they appointed him is because of all of the backlash that went down last summer after the George Floyd murders. And so is it because he was qualified? They're saying that he was more qualified, but why did they also had to say that one of the reasons they did that is that they're trying to address what happened over this past summer? So let's give a shout out to Dr. Jason Wingard.
Yeah, and I think certainly more and more corporate and academic institutions are yielding to the notion of becoming more woke. And I don't necessarily think of that as a bad thing, because in this era where corporations and academic institutions are taking the lead on something that they normally have to be forced to do by government. So in my mind, by hook, crook, or crawl, because I think we both agree that there's no way he would be in that position if he were not qualified, because they'd be
Right.
crying all kinds of foul. And as a matter of fact, as you said, he's probably more than just qualified. And so however he got in there, we know that in the past, there have been many whites who've gotten things and where they really shouldn't have got, except for pressure that came from other sources, and none of them were willing to give it back. So let's support this brother. Let's hope that he is about it. And we will definitely continue to look for other firsts in that. So I share your reservation on the fact that, you know, it took that for him to get there, but I applaud the fact that he's there. So that's it for another edition of the Brothers Talk Show on M24 News. Remember to reach us with your comments, questions, suggestions. We're at the Brothers Talk on Twitter, the Brothers Talk on Instagram, the Facebook group of the same name. And if you care to share more with us in detail, hit us up at the email address, thebrotherstalk@gmail.com, and tune into our weekly podcast, which drops each Friday, wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Remember, let's do better today, because that's all we really have.